What kind of man starts an airline with no planes, no money, and no experience? Richard Branson, of course. In 1984, a canceled flight stranded him on a Caribbean island. Most people would have just waited. Branson? He rented a plane, grabbed a chalkboard, scribbled Virgin Airlines, $39, one way to BVI, and started selling seats to strangers. That wild move didn't just get him home, it launched an airline. And not just any airline. Virgin Atlantic would go on to challenge industry giants, outmarket British Airways, and redefine air travel with style, sass, and seatback TVs. So how did this all happen? Let's rewind. Richard Branson wasn't planning to start an airline that day. He was just trying to see his girlfriend. He was in Puerto Rico. She was in the British Virgin Islands. But at the last minute, his flight got canceled, no refunds, no alternatives, just stuck. Most people would have complained. Branson? He got creative. He called around, found a private charter company, and negotiated a last-minute deal for a small plane. Then he borrowed a chalkboard, wrote, Virgin Airlines $39 one way to BVI, and walked around the terminal selling tickets to every stranded traveler he could find. It wasn't a joke, it was a hustle. By the time the plane was ready, every seat was sold. He had covered the cost, solved his own problem, and planted a seed that would grow into something wild. That night, someone joked, "You should start your own airline." It was meant as a throwaway comment. But Branson couldn't let it go. He already had Virgin Records, a label that had signed everyone from the Sex Pistols to the Rolling Stones. But an airline? That was insane. It was risky, expensive, highly regulated, and exactly the kind of challenge he couldn't resist. Turning a joke into a billion-dollar airline wasn't easy. Branson knew music. He knew branding. But aviation? That was a whole different beast. Still, he was obsessed with the idea. What if flying could actually be fun? He started small. Virgin Atlantic launched in 1984 with a single plane, a used Boeing 747 that barely passed inspection. He leased it with money borrowed against Virgin Records. If the airline failed, the music empire would go down with it. The mission? Disrupt the stale corporate flying experience. While other airlines packed people in like cattle, Virgin offered personal TVs, mood lighting, free ice cream, and smiling crew in stylish uniforms. It wasn't just about getting from A to B. It was about the experience. And passengers loved it. But the industry didn't. Competitors laughed. The record guy with the flying circus? British Airways, the UK's aviation king, wasn't laughing for long. Virgin Atlantic was gaining fans fast. And Branson, scruffy, grinning, impossible to ignore, was quickly becoming their biggest PR weapon. What started as a joke was now a problem for the aviation establishment. And British Airways decided to do something about it. Virgin Atlantic was gaining altitude. Too fast for British Airways. To them, Branson wasn't just a quirky competitor, he was a threat. So, they hit back. Hard. BA launched a dirty campaign to crush Virgin. Secret meetings, smear tactics, even hacking. Employees from British Airways were caught accessing Virgin's confidential flight data, poaching passengers, and spreading fake stories in the press. Branson fought back, not just with press releases, but with a lawsuit. He sued British Airways for libel and won. The verdict? BA had to pay £3 million in damages and another £500,000 personally to Branson. What did he do with the money? He split it among his Virgin Atlantic staff as a thank you for sticking through the turbulence. It wasn't just a legal win. It was a PR knockout. The public loved it. David versus Goliath. Underdog versus establishment. Virgin wasn't just another airline anymore. It was a movement. It had personality, humor, rebellion. And Branson leaned into it, showing up at events dressed as a pilot or flying a hot air balloon across oceans. British Airways had deeper pockets, but Branson had something they didn't: story, spirit, and style. Virgin Atlantic didn't become a global brand by accident. It was Branson's genius not in flying planes, but in telling stories. He made Virgin Atlantic feel like a rock band in the sky. Every detail, was a rebellion against boring. From quirky safety videos, to in-flight massages, to mood lighting that felt more like a club than a cabin. Even when money was tight, Branson invested in brand. He knew loyalty came from emotion, not just price. While rivals talked about efficiency, Virgin talked about fun. While other CEOs stayed in boardrooms, Branson jumped out of planes, raced powerboats across the Atlantic, and plastered his face across ads. It wasn't vanity, it was strategy. By making himself the face of the brand, he gave Virgin a human edge, someone people could root for. And it worked. Virgin Atlantic built a cult, following travelers who chose them not just for the service, but for what they represented. They weren't the cheapest or the biggest, but they were unforgettable. That's Branson's superpower, turning business into theater and brands into experiences. And even in a brutally competitive industry, that's how Virgin Atlantic carved its name into the sky. One canceled flight, one borrowed plane, one chalkboard. That's all it took to launch Virgin Atlantic. But behind the stunt was something deeper. A vision for doing business differently with storytelling, style, and just enough madness to make it work. Branson didn't build an airline. He built a brand people felt. And in an industry ruled by numbers, he proved that a little personality could go a long way, even at 35,000 feet. If you love stories like this, where wild ideas become billion-dollar brands, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that bell so you don't miss the next one.